invest in certain instruments, or most of the things are not allowed for philanthropy to, whether shares or bonds and stuff like that, or impact bonds.
But Nishit,
how can we go about that?
Yeah, no, so obviously you have a variety of issues, some of which are tax related, some of which are SEBI regulation related and so on. I think Mr. UK Sinha, who's the SEBI chief and still has some of his term to go, is somebody who I think can give you a very patient hearing. So I'd certainly talk to him. I'm happy to discuss it with him as well. But I think the AIF structure enables you to set up an impact investment fund with impact as its objective. So if once you've set that up and you've set aside some money in that fund for grants and all of that, then you can in fact create a domestic AIF, which is perhaps pari passu with what you're doing globally, etc. And so that might be the structure which has the flexibility to be able to deal with that.
I appreciate that.
Back there, please.
What would your advice be on how to manage a successful social enterprise's interaction with local governments and other parties who may fear that their constituency or community is being now serviced by a for-profit entity? I mean, we saw some backlash with microfinance when it became large and successful. So is there anything that we can do to make the local communities and the political constituency to embrace?
No, I think that's an important question. Certainly we saw that in Andhra Pradesh in the microfinance crisis. This is part of the role of the impact investment fund. It's not necessarily the burden that an entrepreneur should carry, but sensitivities to local communities, dealing with disruptive change. These are things that the fund should really worry about, because after all, when you say your goal is market development, it has to be sustainable market development. It has to be market development without too many losers, etc. And therefore, and this is why you need to have that conversation with LPs, and LPs need to understand that you have to have a side pocket in your fund which is for grant making, which is for engaging with communities. And that's why your overall net portfolio returns are not going to be, what a venture capitalist can deliver, because venture capitalists are not going to be worrying about that. But you are worrying about that because, as we saw in Andhra Pradesh, when the backlash happens and you can't deal with that, then, the market, kind of craters. So this is part of the design of market development. And you have to, let's be clear, you have to set aside funds to work on that side as well. You have to set aside funds to work on industry association, on consumer protection groups, in working with government to establish appropriate policies and regulations. Otherwise, markets will not develop properly. That is enlightened investing. That is how you develop markets. So that's the part of what an impact investment fund does. And an impact, if I was an LP and I was looking at investing in impact investment funds, I'd want to make sure that the people who are investing are really very sensitive to these issues that you're bringing up, and know when and how to intervene and with which kinds of players to be able to deal with these sustainability issues. Because, you can get too far ahead of yourself, because yes, you're absolutely right. Sometimes markets can be very cruel. And I'll just tell you about hospitals in India. Hospitals in India are such that where if you are presenting yourself with a really life-threatening disease, the hospital will say, pay me all the cash up front, and otherwise I'm not going to take you in. And if that's the way it's going to work, a lot of people are going to come up at the hospital and die, and there could be very easily a backlash against that. Now, if I was running an impact investment fund, I'd set up a small insurance program or work with government in some ways so that people who come in can get that kind of medical care if they can't put cash up front. So I'd run a bit of an insurance program. That may be a non-profit thing that I'm doing to make sure the market for affordable hospitals develops well.
And
these are the kinds of interventions that are required if markets have to develop sustainably. But it requires you to be, as a fund manager and as an LP, supportive and thoughtful of these kinds of efforts. You cannot, again, if you cannot operate as a commercial VC in these markets because you're dealing with poor people who need a lot of help and support in these kinds of situations. Can you think about how cruel it can be if you build a spanking, brand new, lovely hospital in a poor area and people present themselves there with life-threatening diseases and the doors are closed because they only want cash payment up front? That is heartless and cruel. And I mean, as an LP or a fund, I would not want it to operate that way because I know that inherently in the long term that's not sustainable. And these are the out of the bubble things you have to understand in these communities before you can be a successful impact investment fund there. Thank you for bringing up that question.
I was going to further that question and ask the role that the Impact Investment Council, bodies of this nature, should be playing.
I think step one is just helping people understand how this investment class should work. I mean, and by the way, these are my personal opinions. I don't know where IIC is in these matters or JIN is in these matters or where you all are. I'm just giving you my own idiosyncratic view of all of this. But I think, first of all, everybody has to agree to some of these things. That if you're an LP, if you're not providing for these things, if you're not giving if you're running these funds too lean and not enabling them to deal with these social consequences and this kind of market support, this kind of market development effort, then you're not really thinking long term or you're not really focused on impact as much. So don't be tempted by this impact versus returns. There are people who will come forward and say, you can have it for free. I don't think you can have it for free. That is, you can't have impact for free. Impact costs money, and the way it will show up is in the net returns of the impact investing funds. So I think that awareness, that understanding is crucial and vital. It starts there. And then once people agree to that and understand that and accept that, then you have to work with the impact investing funds to really make sure that they understand the tools, the levers that can help you on the market development efforts you have to do, which can include industry associations, consumer protection groups, assistance in policy making, investing ahead of market maturity, or there are a variety of things you have to do. You may have to make investments as grants. And by the way, I mean, of course, just to boost in a way and be parochial for a moment, I mean, I think at Omidyar Network, Paula sitting there, you can talk to her, but a lot of these issues and debates and mechanisms at ON have been worked out pretty well. A lot of this is experiential from the work that ON has done in terms of, problem first, tool second. So I think there's now, with people like ON and others, a wealth of experience around how to use these different tools, these different levers. And I think that has to be more widely shared in the impact investing community. And then collectively, just like you do on the commercial side, collectively impact investing funds have to collaborate and work together to develop these markets and also have LPs participate in that.
That's fabulous. And that might be a great closing point as well. Jayan, thank you so much for taking your time in the middle of some very important happenings in the country, a lot of commitments for yourself, and on behalf of the entire impact investment community, thank you, and a generous round of applause, please.
Ladies and gentlemen, please take your seats. We're starting the next session. Good morning, everyone. Can we
Good morning. I'm just going to introduce the first moderator today. We have actually a very good session coming up about asset class or an investing approach, and we'll have 4 great speakers speaking for approximately 9 minutes. It actually gives me a great deal of pleasure to introduce Vishal Mehta. We have at Responsibility, we've been an LP in Vishal in low capital for quite a few years now, and I've known him personally for 5 years. He has been the co-founder and managing director of Lok Capital, and has started this 12 years ago. So since 2004, he's been involved with Lok Capital, and he's helped build Lok Capital into one of the leading institutions in impact investment firms in India, and it today manages about 85 million under its corpus, and is actually raising its 3rd fund. He's deeply passionate about driving development impact through sustainable business models, and spearheads Lok Foundation, which is a GP in Lok Capital. He also has been involved in the IIC, and I think he's the only person that's been in all 3 executive committees. Prior to Lok, he worked for about a decade in marketing and business development in the financial services and telecom sector, both in the emerging markets as well as in the developed world. And he holds an engineering degree out here from the Delhi University and an MBA out of Ann Arbor in Michigan. Let me, please help me welcome Vishal Mehta, please.
Is it working? Thank you, Anand, for this nice and warm introduction. The way we're going to conduct this session is that I'll spend about 5 minutes setting it up, and then we have 3 very wonderful experienced speakers who are going to talk about the subject, which actually has already come up multiple times during the last day and a half, whether it's an asset class or whether it's an investing approach. When I was thinking about my own introduction, I wanted to have a little bit heavy and deep start to this. But yesterday, Amit Bhatia set up a very high benchmark. He's already shared with us the secret of realizing God by narrating the story of Vivekananda. So it's kind of difficult to go deeper than that. But I'll still attempt. I'll stick to the Buddha and talk about the philosophy of middle way, and as they call it, the middle path. Let me quote something which I've taken from a website that preaches Buddhism. Throughout the 2,500 years history of Buddhism, the concept of middle way has seen multiple interpretations. But simply, it describes the way or path that transcends and reconciles the duality that we see in most situations and thinkings around us. In the broadest sense, the middle way refers to Buddha's enlightened view of life and also the actions or attitudes that will create happiness for oneself and others. It is found in the ongoing dynamic effort to apply Buddhist wisdom to the questions and challenges of life and society. In this sense, the search for the middle way can be considered as a universal pursuit of all Buddhist traditions. The quest for a way of life that would give the greatest value to the human existence and help relieve the world of suffering. It is for this reason that Buddhism itself is sometimes called as the middle way. If this is too heavy for an investor conference, let me try and make it a little bit simpler. What is that one word that describes that most of us try to inculcate in our lives? What is that thing that we believe is so desperately missing in our society right now? I think one search word is balance, which is what needs to be badly restored in many of the things around us. And according to me, this balance as well as the philosophy of the middle way are probably one and the same thing. If this is still too philosophical, let's talk about things that we know and we understand and we do in our lives, business and economics. I would argue that the conventional economic development models are failing time and time again, right? Greece, many other parts in Europe, 2008 crisis. In fact, in our own kind of smaller world, what happened in microfinance in Andhra Pradesh in 2010 is also a very specific example of what happens when you lose sight of balance, right? I would not like to go into details of these market failures, but we all know there are several well-documented researches around how conventional and purely market-driven models have not been able to solve some of the basic problems, right? Namely, income equality, environmental sustainability, even basic services of delivering, basic services of health and education to a very large chunk of population around the world. For a moment, let's also talk about this balance in our political environment. We know that economics and social and politics are not isolated, they're all interrelated. So political environment is also very important. Again, I would argue that the political environment that we have seen across the world in the last few decades is probably one of the most polarized that we have seen and experienced. The US elections, the Brexit in UK, how politics in India is handled and religion and politics get mixed up many a times, largely with the end result of polarizing communities. These are again all very recent examples. But seems like politicians around the world have figured out that polarization might be actually a very useful way for them to win elections. And that's the real worry, right? Because the debate seems to be always moving away from the real issues, and it's all about, and the polarization around in the political environment is also very high. This whole concept of left and right in politics is actually falling apart, right? So my argument there is that, we need to learn to walk straight, and restoration of balance and middle way is very important in the politics also around us. I see inclusive businesses and impact as the middle way for restoring balance for at least our economic development model. In fact, the implications of this imbalance are not just limited to economic aspects in the pure sense of the word, but this is also directly linked to several other social issues that we face, especially lack of employment and environmental crisis. The economic model is very much linked to our social and political realities as well. And now that's the beauty of this format, where there's no discussion. So now that we've agreed that impact investing is probably the only solution to all the problems that we face, let's discuss whether it's an asset class or whether it's an investing approach. I would call upon stage Brooks Preston from OPIC to talk about the subject. After that, Jaap from FMO, and then Philip from Proparco will share their own individual experiences as well as their own institutional experiences about this topic. I will come back on stage in the end, and at that point I do want to talk a little bit about the inclusion aspect, especially in India, and what is the relevance of inclusion specific to the Indian opportunity. But with that, let me please welcome Brooks, and then in the same sequence, then Jaap and Philip will talk about it. Thanks.
So thank you very much, Vishal. Thank you very much to ISC for including OPIC in this event. For those that don't know OPIC, we're not an oil cartel. We are the Development Finance Bank. I'm not sure if OPEC is an oil cartel either anymore. That's another question. But So OPIC is the Development Finance Institution in the United States government. We have about 400 people, a book of $21 billion in 105 different countries. And everything we do at OPIC has to meet 4 different tests. We've got to be promoting sustainable development in emerging markets. We have to be catalyzing commercial capital alongside our money. And we have to be making money. We're a profitable bank. We make between $250 to $500 million a year in profits for the U.S. taxpayer. And then fourthly, we're obviously supporting U.S. foreign policy. So in a nutshell, that is what OPIC does and what we have been doing for almost 40 years. And there's a question, of course, as to what degree is that impact or not, and I'll come back to that. But to the question that is posed to us of is impact investing an asset class, my proposal is no. And I'll frame this discussion with what I think are 3 basically paralyzing questions for the sector. The first sort of paralyzing question that we all face is, how much return should you get for your impact dollar? Now, I think that's a question that is essentially the exact same question is, how much return should I get for my normal dollar? And that debate has gone on for hundreds of years and will go on for hundreds of years. And you can follow that debate 24/7 on CNBC or Bloomberg or CNN. There is no determinative answer for how much return you should get for your dollar. It's really an individual choice depending on how you perceive risk and return, et cetera. Second paralyzing question is, how much impact should I get for my impact dollar? We had discussions on that yesterday, more today. Should you get 5 units of impact or 6 units? Is 6 units of healthcare impact the same thing as 6 units of education impact? You know, we could debate this for a very long time and miss completely the fact that actually, if you're debating, you know, how to allocate your $10 million to 5 versus 6 units of impact, you miss the fact that maybe you could allocate $1 billion for 2 units of impact, and then you're really having some impact. And then, of course, the third paralyzing question is, what is impact investing itself? How do we want to define that? And I think the tragedy of these questions is that, well, for all of us in the room, we're here because we've answered these questions to our satisfaction. Somehow we think it's incumbent on us to answer it to other people's satisfaction. But in fact, I think what's happening by pretending that these questions have determinative answers keeps a lot of capital on the sideline. We have a tendency to think that capital is a scarce resource for obvious reasons, those of us who have been doing fundraising in the past. But don't forget that capital is potentially the least scarce resource. It's fungible, abundant, there's trillions of it. It's just that it flows to projects where there is return. And when it flows in abundance to projects where people perceive returns, we call that a bubble. And India has had one of those, at least, and even Impact has had that as well in the clean tech bubble of 2006, 7, and 8. So I think those are 3 paralyzing